The January 6, 2021 special meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education is called to order. I am the chair, Christine Vitale, and I'm joined tonight by Mr. Asa, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Rotelli, Ms. Pitka, Ms. Guernsey, Ms. Jacobson, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, as well as Superintendent Cummings and our central office staff, executive directors. We are also joined by the Fairfield Equity Coalition, and I ask you all to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America
and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's nice seeing everyone and to meet tonight. I know that I don't know if you're like me. I know your attention is probably on what's going on in our nation's capital. It is it's something to watch. I considered canceling the meeting because I know that people have been just following it and maybe a little bit preoccupied, but I felt it was important that we meet and protect our democracy and have this very important conversation. So thank you. And just for the public who is listening, the Fairfield Equity Coalition came before the board in November. They are doing some very important work, studying social justice and racial justice within our schools in particular and the town as a whole. They asked the board if they could distribute a survey to the Fairfield Public Schools staff. The board approved that request. The survey went out in December, and now they are here before us tonight to share the results of that survey, as well as the work they have completed over the last months. They've done a lot of research. They have a report and are here to suggest some changes to help make our school district more equitable for all. So before I bring it to the group, I'm going to just ask Mr. Cummings if he has anything that he would like to add before we let the coalition present.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Mike Cummings, Superintendent. I would only echo what Ms. Vitale said about the group. I know that having worked with the leadership in the Fairfield Equity Coalition since, I believe it was May or June, I know that there's been a tremendous amount of commitment to the report, as you can tell, and its thoroughness and the research that went into it, and certainly the number of people who've been involved. I think it speaks very well to the level of commitment and concern that our alumni students bring to this issue in the Fairfield Public Schools. And so I'm eager to hear not only more tonight from them as they go through their recommendations, but and I'm eager to continue the conversation and the work with them as we go forward. So thank you again.
Thank you. Who is going to present tonight? Actually, why don't you all introduce yourselves so we can, have a conversation. Lanisha, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lanisha Brevard. I am the president of the Fairfield Equity Coalition, and I am here with two of our members, Ian Layton. He can introduce himself. He is the executive editorial, and as well as Aaliyah Augustin. She's the head of publicity. She is going to be controlling the screen sharing tonight. So as we wait for her, I'm not sure if she has while she's getting that together, I want to begin by thanking the Superintendent Cummings, as well as the Board of Education for having us here today, as well as the members of FEC and our community members that allowed us to present to you today by providing knowledge, hard work, and guidance that influence this report. We are here today to present our Promoting Anti-Racism and Racial Equity in Fairfield Public Schools report. Aaliyah is ready, so if she can start screen sharing, that will be great. And as I said, we are promoting the Anti-Racism and Racial Equity in Fairfield Public Schools report. I'm going to turn this over to Ian as we go into the next slide.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Layton. Let me know if you can't hear me or if I have connection problems. But before we begin, I just wanted to echo Lanisha in saying we have lot to cover tonight, and we've worked very hard as an organization, and I just want to make sure that the over 50 people that contributed to this report are acknowledged, because I can't and don't want to take credit for all of this work, and we had a really wonderful group of people helping us out with this report over the last half year. So I wanted just to acknowledge that. But basically, the purpose of our report, as many of you probably know, is to outline our 10 broad reforms, which we call our actionable changes, that describe a multifaceted approach to incorporating anti-racism and racial equity in education. These actionable changes cover the major components to school life, whether that's the curriculum or professional development, disciplinary practices, extracurricular opportunities, things of that nature, that coalesce into the totality of a student's experience in Fairfield Public Schools.
We hope that this is the beginning of a long-awaited conversation. Not only this, but we hope that this conversation will illuminate what we may have gotten wrong or failed to foresee. This expertise of the board and FPS is absolutely necessary to achieve our lofty goals, and it is our sincere hope that we can reach mutually agreed upon reforms to enact over the next couple of weeks, months, and even years. Our coalition was formed in June 2020 with 80 to 100 members within it. When the report was being developed, we had 11 different committees: internal and external relations, civic engagement, editorial, publicity, longevity, local and national policy, data, recruitment, and our members range in age from 15 to 27 years of age and are located all over the United States as far away as California.
So I know everyone read the report coming into this, so you are all probably familiar with our definitions page. And we compiled a list of definitions that we felt were important for just kind of an understanding before getting into the content of the report. And so we're only going to highlight the first 7 or so that are really important, just so everyone listening, whether they're on the board or in the audience, can get kind of an understanding of the most important terms that are used most frequently throughout the report. So really quickly, the first term that we wanted to touch upon is anti-racism, which is not just being not racist, but it is the active process of recognizing, challenging, and changing the individual attitudes and prejudices and systemic policies of racism. Anti-racist work involves an awareness of power imbalances and advocacy for policies that redistribute power and reduce racial inequity. The next term that we have is BIPOC, which is an acronym that refers to Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color, a term that strives to honor and include the narratives of Black and Indigenous peoples, which have historically been erased and differ from the experience of other people of color. And so we'll be using the term BIPOC pretty frequently throughout the report, and that's what that umbrella term refers to. Next, we have cultural competency, which is a set of behaviors and attitudes that enable people to effectively navigate situations in which individuals of different backgrounds are present. Cultural competency develops a desire to seek out different perspectives and can be realized in both students and teachers, which is an important realization for the purposes of this report. Next, we have decolonization of curricula, which is the effort to dismantle colonial practices in educational institutions, reflect on what narratives are prioritized, and validate the diverse identities of students. Decolonization requires the restructuring of the Eurocentric curriculum and institutionalized power dynamics. Next, we have racial equity, which is the work to reform policies, practices, and structures so that racial identity will no longer predict one's outcome in life. Racial equity strives for fairness, not equal treatment, and involves creating opportunities for shared power and decision-making. Just as differential outcomes by race is a component of systemic racism, racial equity is a component of anti-racism. And I believe the last one is implicit bias, which is subconscious attitudes or stereotypes towards others based on characteristics such as race and ethnicity, which can affect the understanding, actions, and decision-making of an individual. These associations are pervasive and develop over the course of a lifetime, and therefore must be mitigated through intentional unlearning and introspection. And actually, the last one is restorative justice, which is a holistic approach to discipline which engages all parties impacted by the issue or behavior to repair harm and communicate about potential solutions. Restorative practices represent a community philosophy in contrast to punishments, which often make no effort towards restitution and remove offenders from conversation. So thank you for bearing with me in that kind of read off, but we thought it was important just to get a base understanding of the most important terms before we get into the rest of the presentation. But we can go ahead and get started on presenting the survey slides of our presentation. So moving along to our surveys, as the board knows, we have administered 2 sets of surveys to both FPS students and alumni and faculty and staff over the course of 2020. Due to concerns over privacy and proper protocol, however, we've only published the entirety of our responses to only the second edition of our surveys, which is made available on our website and is free to anyone who's interested in them. The purpose of these surveys was to get a perspective from the FPS community itself, which we wanted reflected and foundational in our report. As mentioned previously, the original 2 surveys were the foundation of these actionable changes that we're going to be sharing with you tonight. And from listening to our passionate community, we developed these actionable changes to reflect the most desired reforms based on the perspectives of teachers, staff, alumni, and students.
As we go in, I just have a quick comment to make. We have the page numbers throughout this of where this may be. So if you would like to follow along, you can have the report open, and on the screen will say exactly what page numbers that corresponds with that. Moving along, the first student survey was administered over the social media channels of our 80 members and amplified across platforms like Instagram and Facebook in June 2020. The total numbers of respondents to this first survey reached 380 respondents. From this survey, we were able to develop and analyze non-traceable statistics. This data can be found in our student survey 1 results as well as in the form of graphics throughout this report. This same distribution process was executed from the second survey, student survey, sorry about that. With this survey, we were able to obtain detailed qualitative perspectives from students and alumni of FPS. These perspectives could be found at the beginning of each actionable changes under student perspectives.
Moving on, the second teacher and staff survey was administered after the district approval. The district approved it in late September. The response rate to this survey reached 134 respondents, which we thought was pretty impressive. And they were also analyzed and categorized by theme. And in addition to summary statistics throughout the report in the results section of the report, you can also see qualitative quotations from teachers and staff at the top of each actionable change under teacher and staff perspectives.
Okay, so now we are moving into the following is the general summary of the major trends found in the student survey, the full summary of which can be found at the beginning of page 18 of our report. Not all respondents answered each question in the survey. Therefore, the total number of responses to each question may vary.
And just to clarify the structure of our slides, we for this instance, we have basically the major 4 themes of the first student survey, and the next slide will be the major themes of the teacher survey, and then we can get into like specifics and stuff. And of course, when it's time for questions, feel free to ask any specific questions about our data. But the first major theme to our first student survey was a strong desire to improve FPS curricula across all subjects to incorporate a more honest, complete, and diverse perspectives on racial identity, racism in all its forms, and the accomplishments of different marginalized groups. For example, 94% of respondents to our first student survey, which is 267 out of 284 total respondents, reported that they were taught incomplete or false narratives in class during their time at Fairfield Public Schools, including topics like Christopher Columbus, the war on drugs, the civil rights movement, and institutional racism. 61 out of 300 respondents mentioned, furthermore, the desire for a better coverage of world history and current events in countries outside the United States and Europe. When presented with the question, what changes would you want to see made into FPS curriculum, 114 out of 217 students reported wanting to see a more historically accurate, less Eurocentric curriculum. When asked for suggestions about starting these conversations in schools at an earlier age, 226 out of 269 respondents voiced that anti-racist teachings need to be incorporated early into education. These responses strongly influence the development of our actual change number 1, which we're going to present later on tonight.
The second major theme to our first student survey dealt with the current disciplinary policies in the district. Aspects like how discipline is enforced, the effectiveness of this process, etc. Unequal application of discipline. 5 respondents described how BIPOC students were targeted or called out for being too loud or for not completing assignments, while white students engaging in the same behavior were not. Respondents felt that discriminatory and/or prejudice events with students and teachers were not handled appropriately by the school administration. 14 out of 121 responses recommended that an investigative reporting team should be established. And you can see actionable change number 7 to get more in detail. 52 out of 231 students responded to the question, did you ever witness racial insensitivity or discrimination from a teacher's peer or administrator at FPS, with accounts of racial insensitivity or discrimination by teachers. 17 accounts on how teachers engage in disciplinary actions with BIPOC students compared to white students. When asked if students had experienced racial insensitivity from a peer specifically, 3 main themes emerged. 1 being students thinking it is okay to make racist remarks if they call it a joke. 2, stereotyping students of other races and ethnicities. And 3, bullying students through racial slurs and gestures. Other themes of our first student survey are a desire from students for more cross-cultural experiences like inter-district collaborative field trips. 19 out of 216 respondents had wanted that, and 30 out of 216 suggested a cultural day.
So, taken holistically, the most significant takeaways from our first student survey, in our view, are the desires for a more inclusive, diverse, and holistic education on race across all subjects, more direct action by faculty and administrators for condemning instances of racism or other racially insensitive remarks, and more opportunities for developing cross-cultural competence for the students. Lanesia, you can take this one if you want. Lanesia, can you hear me?
She just said in the chat that she's muted. So let me try to unmute her.
Oh, okay.
Can everyone hear?
Just
Hi, I
a
can hear you, Lanesia.
request.
Hi. So responses to our second student. Yes. So this is moving on to the teacher survey results overview. So responses to our second student survey, teacher survey had similar trends that we will highlight now. The second teacher survey, after approval by the Board of Education, was disseminated through email by Superintendent Cummings to the entirety of FPS faculty and staff, reaching a total sample size of 134 respondents. The following are highlighted themes from the full teacher survey results section, which can be found on the beginning of page 24 in our report. We are excited to see that many faculty and staff self-reported their existing anti-racism working strategy. 16 out of 58 respondents who answered they do incorporate anti-racist ideas in their classroom cited the use of books in English courses, 10 mentioned history courses, and 6 even mentioned STEM courses. Ian, I'm going to turn this to you.
Sorry, everybody. I was muted again. Sorry. So despite these...
Ian, 1 second. I'm just talking to Marco to try and get you and Lanesia co-hosts so you can mute and unmute yourself. Sorry about that.
No worries. Do you want me to wait or should I continue?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So despite these good proactive efforts towards anti-racism made by a lot of teachers, One of the most prevalent types of responses to our second teacher survey was a desire for more anti-racism training and support from administrators and district officials. 74.3%, which is 87 out of 117 respondents, mentioned that they would benefit from more institutional support. 42 out of 117 respondents reported a lack of professional development or training on anti-racism, with many reiterating the need for recurring and frequent professional development. 20 out of 117 respondents called for increased support from central office, asking for things like, quote, explicit codified language and mission statements, end quote.
Many respondents to our teacher and staff survey noted the opportunity for teaching anti-racism outside the classroom. Despite being able to name concrete examples of these types of measures, like field trips, presentations, etc., respondents nearly agreed that building connections to neighboring school districts could lead to positive impacts for our communities. 36 responses specifically noted that developing collaborations with other schools, and 30 explicitly noted that student exposure to more diverse would be beneficial.
In terms of current disciplinary policies, 21%, which is 24 out of 117 respondents, explicitly mentioned the need to incorporate restorative justice practices into disciplinary procedures. 9 out of 117 respondents expressed a desire for more evenly applied discipline or more guidance on disciplining students from administrators. And speaking to the common misconceptions that we kind of generalized for tonight's presentation, we were encouraged to see that a majority of our respondents to our second teacher and staff survey expressed a strong desire for change. However, there was a significant minority of respondents that suggested fundamental misunderstandings or mischaracterizations of the work that we're trying to do. Several respondents, for example, were entirely hostile to this work, exclaiming that it was actually reverse racism and harmful to the school environment. Several others mentioned that they strongly disagreed with the notion that current curriculum, disciplinary actions, and other policies can contribute to or be improved upon in terms of discussion or treatment of race.
These types of negative responses reflect the commonly held misconceptions, like Ian was talking about, that suggested more internalized education, training, and community discussions surrounding these issues. We hope to dispel these and other misconceptions throughout the rest of this presentation.
So at this point, we would like to reiterate that the responses collected from all of our surveys from students and faculty and staff and alumni were foundational to the actionable changes. So the actionable changes that you read about for today and that we're going to present to you are based solely on the majority of the responses that we got tonight. The following actionable changes reflect these opinions and are corroborated by extensive research of the leading academic thought on anti-racism education. So actionable change number 1 reads, ensure curricula for all grade levels prioritizes cultural and racial diversity by amplifying representative perspective and experiences of historically marginalized groups.
Actual Change 1 is one of our lengthy sections of our report. In it, we describe the importance of decolonization curricula and promoting anti-racism in all subjects across all grade levels. Then we attempt to do as close as a comprehensive analysis as possible, given the sources we had to analyze current curricula documents and suggested strategies, both broad and specific, to decolonize lesson plan in favor of the principles of anti-racism.
So these are some of the quotes that we pulled from our report. And throughout this presentation, for the lengthier quotes, we're going to just summarize them. And then, of course, we'll make these slides available to anyone who wants them. But these are all pulled from our report in data publications, which is already made public. And so these quotes are from students. And the first one talks about the necessity to teach anti-racist principles at an early age. And actually, significant research demonstrates and suggests that in order to, nip these racial biases in the butt, they need to be taught at an earlier age. That's really important to make sure that from the get, students are learning to appreciate difference and cultural differences and that kind of stuff. And this other quote talks about how this respondent believed that history classes kind of focused on racial inequity of the past, but nothing that's going on currently in America.
Sorry. Okay, so this first quote on our left talks about being able to understand anti-Blackness, which is very important. And as this student explains that the significance of what it can do to a child developing in an academic situation and environment. And then moving on to, and sorry, this is from a teacher, not a student. But also, this is moving on to the second quote, which is talking about the curriculum itself, and how the requiring as much as possible in a year that teachers are forced to take a poor approach to just getting the required material, also let alone having time to enhance the curriculum. So this is enforcing future planning to where it gives the teachers enough time to be comfortable within it personally, as well as being able to teach it.
So this is a graphic that visually represents some of the data that we collected as a coalition. And so when asked when should FPS introduce anti-racism teachings, 84% of respondents to our first student survey felt that anti-racism teaching should be incorporated into early FPS education. And like I just mentioned previously, that aligns with the research that suggests that it's most effective to do so at a young age.
Moving on, we won't read out each individual recommendation by subject. However, we are going to generalize the universal principles of decolonization and anti-racism that may apply during curriculum reform.
So a major trend of all of our surveys was the mention of a process known as decolonizing curricula. There exists extensive research on the importance of decolonizing curricula, but the brass tacks of it is that this term largely refers to the restructuring of curriculum to include a myriad of perspectives of different races, ethnicities, cultures outside of the dominant white Eurocentric viewpoint. Such a limited viewpoint that we currently have leads to the incomplete and biased teachings of historical and present realities concerning race, racism, and the accomplishment of marginalized groups. We must make an intentional, comprehensive effort to incorporate racially diverse perspectives so that the dominant white viewpoint is one of just many, thereby correcting false narratives and completing the picture for our students.
It's important to note that decolonization is directly related by racism in education. By decolonizing our lesson plans, we are actively challenging the notion, either explicitly stated or implicitly stated, suggestion, that the dominant white perspective is absolute truth. By decolonizing, we challenge the own prejudices and misconceptions concerning racial identity in historical and present-day racism, and the contributions of marginalized people, becoming that much closer to understanding the truth behind our racist past and present while accepting the beauty and importance of difference.
So lastly, we want to also address the popular reform of developing what's called a diversity graduation requirement, which some districts have suggested doing, wherein students take a class or two to learn about diversity in different cultures in order to pass the requirements for graduation. While such a class we think is well intended, the scope of our recommended reforms, which is decolonizing curricula and promoting anti-racism at all subjects and all grade levels, makes that requirement superfluous. In other words, the work that we're trying to advocate for is the most effective and best way to make sure that our students leaving Fairfield Public Schools has an anti-racist mindset, appreciates and seeks out difference, and any diversity requirement is just limiting in that regard. And so we advocate against that, actually.
So moving forward, this is actual change number 1, summary recommendations, social studies. So for subjects like social studies, English, and other humanities courses, it is essential to diversify the thinkers that are read and taught. A general rule of thumb is when learning about group, cultural, race, that sources used should be from the members of said group of race. Learn about a topic, source itself. These tactics avoid the inevitable misconceptions or biases that stem from someone outside of a given group explaining how said groups operate.
So these are our recommendations for STEM. And rather than read them all, I'm just going to talk about broadly what anti-racism in STEM looks like. And for STEM courses, it's important to debunk the notion that all of these courses are objective and therefore neutral. It is impossible for science and other STEM classrooms to be truly and holistically neutral when instruction occurs within the oppressive and historical and political landscapes in which we exist. Additionally, knowing that STEM fields are predominantly white and exclusionary, it is also important to promote a science identity in all of our students. Developing lesson plans that speak to these realities and incorporate identity, in addition to the conventional STEM theory and curriculum, will help lead students who otherwise feel alienated or unbelonging to feel included and like they can actually succeed in these fields. So, and for subjects like music and art, world language and health, the principles of anti-racism and decolonization apply. These are universal principles, like we said. So music and art, things like diversifying the composers and genres studied and performed, and moving towards more culturally responsive art education are important things. For world language, which we noted in our report actually does a pretty good job of incorporating culture in an appropriate and holistic sense as it currently stands, we suggest the further incorporation of social justice issues into these world language courses, acknowledging the different cultures and not putting any kind of hierarchical value to them. And in health, we also want to expand on health education to include the social determinants of health, the social determinants of health being the sociological framework by which students can appreciate how our institutions and societal factors influence individual health outcomes.
So moving on to our second actionable change, which is implicit mandatory anti-racism, implicit biases. Sorry about that. Implement mandatory anti-racism, implicit biases, and restorative justice trainings led by independent professionals for all faculty and staff on a frequent and ongoing basis.
So on the present slide are a couple of student quotes, and since they're short, I'll just read them really quickly. There was inequitable treatment to students of color by teachers and administration. That is from a student respondent of the class of 2016 on their personal or witnessed experience of racial insensitivity. And the second quote is, a teacher said the N-word in my class and thought it was okay. And that's from another student as well.
So for these, I will read them quickly. The change needs to start with adults reflecting and acknowledging their own biases first. This is from an elementary school teacher. And the second quote is trainings that explore systematic racism, particularly biases and how racism affects students and staff within a school building and across a district. I think many people are blind to the impact and reality of systematic racism, but would be open to learning and exploring. And this is also from elementary school teacher. Relating it back to actionable change 2, we will touch upon this in the next 3 slides. But this is a true reflection on the importance of having a structure in place for a school climate specialist to handle instances of racism. In addition to implicit bias trainings and cultural competency trainings for the faculty.
So this is another graphic that is visually representing the responses to the question, did you ever witness racial insensitivity or discrimination from a teacher, peer, or administrator at FPS? And the overwhelming majority of respondents, 77% to our first student survey, did witness or experience it, which suggests the need for more trainings for staff on how to appropriately bridge or discuss subjects like different cultures and different races in a way that's not offensive or biased in any kind of way. This graph asks, have you ever experienced or witnessed any racial harassment or discrimination in your time at FPS? This is for teachers specifically, and 64% of respondents to our teacher and staff survey also responded to the above question in the affirmative, which is another sizable majority of our respondents, which further suggests the need that not only is there racial insensitivity from faculty to student, but it's also from faculty to their fellow coworkers. So all around, we kind of felt that there was a strong need for these types of trainings.
May I ask you a quick question about that one?
Sure.
Because the key under the graph.
Yes. So for this one, this was supposed to be taken out of the presentation. I don't think it's up. I don't think it refreshed for Aaliyah, but on my screen it is not here. This was something that we had come across that was an error on our end, and we had taken it out of the report, as well as it should have been out of this presentation. I sent a document that had all of the changes from that we had changed within the report earlier through Superintendent Cummings.
Okay.
Yeah, our apologies for that. That's a mistake on our end. So you can disregard that specific questions. But moving on to the second survey, or this next slide. Do you feel that the mandatory trainings you receive enable you to implement anti-racist teachings in the classroom? And 78% of respondents to our teacher and staff survey suggested that they are ill-equipped to incorporate these principles into their classrooms or into their professional capacities, which further suggests the needs for these trainings.
So moving on, the same setup as actual change number 1. This is just an overview. So after talking about curriculum changes, we felt it was logical to speak on the need for implementing measures for the professional development of faculty and staff to these reforms to the curriculum can be appropriately, accurately, and respectfully taught. These ideas are what comprise actual change 2.
So just to go off that, Actionable Change 2 describes the several trainings we see as essential for anti-racism to be properly promoted in the classroom in an academic sense, but also importantly in an interpersonal and social sense. You know, school's much more than just lesson plans. It's about developing relationships and with your teachers and your peers. So it's in those relationships that it's particularly important to be able to be culturally competent and not racially biased in any kind of sense.
Describe on page 53 of the report the current factors concerning school climate in the district. Generally speaking, we found that the current structure of the school climate specialist can benefit from more explicit trainings in anti-racism, how to handle incidents of racism or racial insensitivity in appropriate, productive, and inclusive terms.
This is some of the reasoning behind promoting trainings in cultural competency, which ensures the discussion of different cultures is appropriate, accurate, and respectful. And also with the improvement of racial bias trainings, which is the active mitigation of our inevitable misconceptions around different groups, and the development of restorative justice training, which replaces punitive disciplinary practices with empathetic and accountable measures. And I just want to ask a quick question to the board. I know from my understanding that we have 60 minutes to present this, and I want to make sure that that's still in fact the case because I want to make sure that we're not going to miss anything in our presentation.
Yeah, we allowed about an hour for this meeting. So, I mean, some of these slides, I know that there's a number of changes that we could probably just read through them because I want to leave time for, discussion.
Absolutely. So I think it might make sense, Lenasia, if we kind of just go through and read briefly on the slides as opposed to the notes that we have, just to make sure that we fit everything in with time for questions. Does that work? Yes, I didn't hear you. Sorry,
Yeah.
Lenasia. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next one, and just so we can finish this out in time. So again, this is just a summary of our recommendations. We kind of stated that already. It's just a myriad of trainings to make sure that we have our teachers competently trained in anti-racism and those types of principles. So actionable change number 3 is kind of a logical endpoint to number 2. So number 2 was about teachers, and now number 3 is about the types of experiences outside of curriculum that we can give to our students. So implement mandatory presentations, courses, and training across all grade levels, where students will learn about the social construction of racial and cultural identity and its influence on themselves and others. And so these quotes kind of speak about what students thought were good ideas for this actionable change. You'll know that they talked about speakers and different presentations. So for the sake of time, we can skip those, but that's just support from what we got from our student respondents. Some of the desires of respondents expressed in this graphic can be actualized through presentations and field trips. And so when we asked what changes were wanted in FPS, some of these responses directly related to our development of this actionable change, just to show you that, once again, that this was based on the perspectives of students. And this is also a graphic that speaks to about half of our respondents who related to positive moments of learning and teaching about race was that they did so in the classroom setting, which is a good statistic. It shows you that in a lot of cases, students had positive moments related to race in the classroom. In addition, they also had different types of World's Fair events that they thought were popular, which I know some schools do on a selective basis. And so that is another opportunity that we see as a potential for kind of augmenting that to more district-wide level. Lanesia, do you want to take this next one?
Sure. Just moving through this, our student surveys made clear that the prevalence of racist remarks made by students towards their fellow classmates indicated a need for incorporation of these measures. Understand these harmful perceptions, and sorry about that. And over to you, Ian.
Yeah, so we can go to the next slide here, Aaliyah.
And
once again, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you can go, Ian.
So once again, this is just the summary of our recommendations, and a lot of it has to do with things that are technically, as we understand it, outside of the curriculum. So things like school-wide book initiatives or presentations, assemblies, and field trips. And I understand we want to make note that these might be different things that we want to do during the hybrid model during the COVID-19 pandemic, but these are things that we could start working on long-term to incorporate anti-racism experiences and principles outside of strict curriculum.
Moving on to actionable change number 4, which is recruit, hire, and retain racially diverse, cultural, competent school faculty and staff. So for these quotes, you can read them as I speak on this. These quotes are pulled from the student survey in which they describe the current diversity in Fairfield Public Schools faculty and staff. It is clear that students are interested in having more racially diverse faculty and staff. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. And these quotes as well, you guys can read them as I say this. These are recommendations from teachers on how to improve hiring practices.
So basically, just to go over this very quickly, obviously there is an importance to racially diverse staff. In a report, we mentioned that research suggests that students of all backgrounds and all races benefit from a diverse faculty and staff. It's important for students of color to see themselves represented in authority figures and figures like teachers and faculty. And it's also important for white students to see that those authority figures don't necessarily have to look like them. And we also want to acknowledge that we know that the district and the state at large has tried for many years to get a more diverse staff across the state and in Fairfield. And we appreciate the difficulty to achieving this end, and that there are institutional barriers and gatekeeping practices in the actual field of education that limit the number of BIPOC faculty, which speaks again to the institutional racism in our country. So we understand that that is an issue, but we hope that there can be a recommitment to achieving this important actionable change. And once again, these are the recommendations that we had for staff. Really quickly, we talked about creating certain interview questions that try to get a sense of cultural competent applicants and trying to get a sense of the types of faculty that we want teaching our kids. But we can move on from this for the sake of time as well.
This is actual change number 5, which is redesign the pathways to success to meet the needs of all students and ensure that race, socioeconomic status, etc. will not predict any student's educational outcome.
So once again, these quotes are just talking about how, from a student perspective, they felt that our tracking systems kind of had a racial divide to them. Whether they're intentional or not, a lot of students noted that students of color were in more lower tiered courses, or they felt that there was just some kind of divide between the leveled courses. And we wanted to highlight that because, as our research shows in tracking systems, the implicit biases that are prevalent in the subjective nature of course sequencing can contribute to these inequities. So that's what these quotes reflect. And again, these are staff quotes from the staff perspectives. And these are just some of the questions that I think we highlighted these quotes because these are some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves when trying to think about ways in which to reform tracking in the district. So once again, actionable change number 5 just briefly seeks to remove the conventional barriers, formal and otherwise, to the academic opportunities while reimagining how FPS defines and measures success. And just a brief note that this actionable change, like the rest of them, benefits all students. We're not just singling out students of color or BIPOC people in the district, but it's important to recognize that these reforms and the work of anti-racism has a beneficial impact for all students and all members of the community. And particularly with actionable change number 5, we think that the ways in which we can reimagine our learning environments and how we perceive and measure success are important for all of our students, but especially for those who are misunderstood because of cultural or other racial reasons. And so very briefly, again, the recommendations for this actionable change are, broadly speaking, reimagining the way that we prepare students and expect for success. And then the next slide, it's just about changing the ways in which student progress is measured. And that's a basic overview of number 5.
So actionable change number 6 is re-image disciplinary systems by shifting towards restorative practices and invest in resources that will support and empower students.
So this speaks largely to our disciplinary policies in the district, which some students noticed were more targeted to our BIPOC students, and there is data that we found online that bears that out, that the BIPOC students in our district specifically are disproportionately disciplined through ISS and OSS and that type of thing. So this kind of has to give us pause, and we have to understand how our disciplinary actions and our policies are punitive, and the punitive nature of these policies is actually not what is the most beneficial to our students, and things like social emotional learning and restorative justice practices are more effective ways of getting students to understand the root of their behavior, their misbehavior, and ways to improve their performance and comfort in the school as well.
So these staff quotes about FPS disciplinary structures speak specifically to the inefficiency in their view of these conventional punitive measures, citing the tendency to produce negative self-perceptions and recriminalizations. The second teacher and staff quote suggests the need for positive disciplinary policies in the style of restorative justice.
So this graphic depicts the desired changes to disciplinary policies expressed by the respondents in our survey. And you'll note that a lot of them suggested restorative justice practices, which we outlined in the report. Some of them suggested stricter practices, which we don't tend to agree with, because stricter punitive practices, in our view, and in the view of a lot of research, suggests that it actually has a counterintuitive effect, and that kind of stuff. But for the sake of time, we can keep moving on. And again, actual change overview is simply just talking about how there's harm to we see our student respondents see, and research suggests that there is harm to the conventional ways in which we discipline our students, and that we have to incorporate more restorative justice with prioritization of mental health and social emotional learning, which is described extensively in our report as well. And these, once again, are our recommendations, and if we have questions on them, we can address it at that time.
And then actionable change number 7 is create an explicit district-wide anti-racism policy and establish a community-based restorative justice committee to prevent and repair harm in cases of discrimination and harassment in FBS.
So this is just a lengthy quote given by one of our students respondents about the racist experiences that her younger brother experienced in the district. And basically the gist of the quote is that a lot of racist things directly happened to her younger brother, and it was kind of undealt with by the administration or by teachers and that kind of stuff. And so it kind of speaks to the need, as does kind of the report holistically, that we encourage the district to develop an explicit anti-racist policy and an infrastructure by which we can mitigate and handle incidents of racism or other racially insensitive comments in a restorative justice manner.
And then these quotes are from our staff that further suggest the need for an anti-racist policy and restorative justice structure. The damage on a child's self-worth and academic willingness and performance can and will be affected if it is not prevented or handled in the proper light.
So in addition to 56% of respondents to our teacher and staff survey suggesting the implementation of mandatory presentations, 12% suggested the development of an investigative reporting team to address any issues of racial insensitivity, harassment, and racism. So this actionable change speaks to the establishment of a restorative justice committee that is a community-based committee that analyzes data on issues of racism or harassment and tries to publish recommendations to the board and other relevant officials to try to mitigate these issues. And the purpose of this actionable change is to democratize this process and to get the community involved in this type of accountability. And we covered this slide, so we can keep going. And this one as well. It's just to implement a district-wide anti-racist policy and to create a restorative justice counselor and committee to deal with the actual infrastructure of enforcing said policy.
Moving along to actionable change number 8, it is develop opportunities for cross-cultural and cross-racial collaboration through extracurricular activities within and outside of the Fairfield community.
Aaliyah, let's skip both quotes slides. And basically what this one is that we'd like to develop within the existing extracurricular structure at the schools, but also between districts, the opportunity to develop these cross-cultural and cross-racial collaborations so students can get a sense of what it's like to live outside Fairfield and what it's like to just to appreciate different cultures. And the most important thing about this is that something that we reiterate a bunch of times is that we have to avoid what's known as the white saviorism narrative. We're not reaching out to Bridgeport or other districts to do good or to better ourselves, but it's for the explicit purpose of developing mutually beneficial relationships that in turn reduce racial biases and things of that nature. So it is mutually beneficial, and we can't have any kind of superiority going into something like this. Otherwise, this type of work is really antithetical to anti-racist education. And these are just the recommendations that, for the sake of time, we can move on. Sorry to be rushing, but we just want to make sure we have time for questions.
And then moving along to actual change number 9, creating a permanent diverse committee of trained students, parents, faculty, and relevant professionals to inform Fairfield Public Schools' future curricular and policy decisions relating to race and equity.
So the overview of this is basically to establish a permanent community committee comprising all relevant parties, so teachers, parents, students, concerned citizens, as a way of informing the types of decisions that are related to curriculum development and policy development. And that way, because, to a certain degree, we are limited because we are a majority white institution to have representative voices of the community to speak to certain things that we might overlook is an important part to democratizing this reform effort. So that's the purpose of number 9.
And also, because due to the fact that providing this understanding and providing this professional. It allows the faculty and staff to be comfortable and create an understanding and comfortable environment and provide the support that the staff will be able to learn and incorporate this.
If we want to just talk about actual change number 10 really quickly, actual change number 10 is unique from the first 9 in that it's more about establishing accountability measures and a kind of a plan for implementation after we discuss with the board and come to some kind of mutual agreement about what it is that we want to pursue. Because tonight is really just a starting point, and we want to make sure that this process of promoting anti-racism and education reform is something that is done over a long period of time involving all the communities. So FEC, that's students, that's teachers, that's parents, and that's the Fairfield community at large. And so actual change number 10 is our preliminary interpretation of the logistical processes behind all of our recommendations. And this is kind of a perfect, this is an actual change that's important for us to get perspective from the board about what it is that we're missing or what it is that we might be seeing that's unrealistic and that kind of stuff.
So, Ian, if you want to go through this.
Yeah, so basically, those are our 10 actionable changes. We're sorry it took so much time, but we wanted to make sure that we really developed a sense of what it is that we're asking for in the report. And basically, to acknowledge our surroundings, we appreciate the potential obstacles to promoting anti-racism education. You know, these reforms are complex and nuanced enough without the effects of COVID-19 or the budgetary restrictions or frankly politics, because unfortunately this work is political, even though it shouldn't be, and the general uncertainty of this work. And so what we our biggest takeaway is that promoting anti-racism and thereby improving the ways in which race is taught, appreciated, and understood is an essential component for our public education system that influences all the other decision-making that has to happen in the district. And so this work, while it can't be completed overnight, has to begin now. And we're really thankful for the board's time and consideration. Yeah. And so next steps. It's just a Q&A period. And Lenasia, of course, I don't want to cut you off. So anything else you'd want to say before we go to questions?
Yes, I just want to add in a few things, but as Ian was saying, we understand the busy schedules and all of this, but the ultimate takeaway of this presentation is being able to influence the district and the people listening and everyone in this, and hopefully our community to these ideas. And we would like to thank you all for taking time to listen to the extensive presentation. I apologize, it's very much in depth. This work and change is well overdue for the community itself and the individual. We thank you for listening and understanding the urge and need for this change to happen. As we have stressed from the beginning, these recommendations, while based in the FPS community and used through extensive research, are offer with our limited perspective. We hope this report does not only influence change within everyone here tonight, but enlightens the community to use their voice with and build off of this report for their own town and things that they're passionate about as well. Moving forward, we hope to have this opportunity to meet with and present to all the faculty and staff K through 12 in the Fairfield Public Schools. We would like to thank you again, and we understand this cannot be fixed overnight, and we are here to hopefully work with you all in the community to create a more inclusive, aware environment for every student, faculty, and staff within the Fairfield Public School systems. Thank you very much for having me here today, and we are open to any questions you may have.
Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you for.
Yes, thank you very much for listening.
Let me just, okay. I'll take it to the board. Does anybody have any questions? Ms. Pitko?
I have a question for Mr. Cummings. I hope he can help me clarify. When we talk about changing our curriculum, is the state of Connecticut changing their curriculum standards in any way to incorporate any of this? Because I know that's where we get our guidance from. So I'm wondering what the process would be.
Thank you. It's a great question. There's no indication from the state at this point that the state is a Common Core district. Excuse me, a Common Core state, It's adopted resulting NGSS and the C3 from the social studies and arts, the national art standards, which are all Army Corps-esque in their development. I think that what will happen is, if you look at the state's development of the most recent high school courses on both Black history and Latin history, American history, I think you'll see the state do is think about how to incorporate those standards into different content themes in order to support districts who want to do this work.
So my second question is, in order for us to incorporate, I can't even paraphrase it because like you guys said, it's like pages worth, into all of our classes in all grades, including STEM, I would have to follow our curricular pattern, correct? Because we can't just sit down and change all the curriculum in one summer.
No, I think what we would have to do is we would have to lay out a plan. I mean, the district, as you know, has a curriculum implementation plan, renewal cycle that we follow. Math is in process. English language arts will be coming up, and I think we have to look at those opportunities. I think that to some degree we're making changes in curriculum. I don't want to say all the time, but we might be moving a unit here and there. But if you think about a curriculum like English language arts, it may be in the text selection that changes can begin to be made. Those are the types of things we could begin to look at. And I think that what the Fairfield Equity Coalition mentions here, as well as the FEA's Anti-Racism Committee, and our own administrators have talked about, is essentially developing a curriculum review process that would be more inclusive of these types of concerns.
Actually doesn't have to do with curriculum, but training that we're taking, and I teach in Stratford, for you guys that don't know. We're taking cultural responsible language training.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you and I have talked about that, but is there a way to now incorporate, and I haven't seen the new budget yet, but for the summer or wherever, PD for our teachers?
We are looking at, we've had conversations with the FAA, again, the Anti-Racism Committee, as recently as a week ago. And one of the things that we're looking at is how to build a sustainable professional learning model around these types of concerns, so that essentially a train the trainers model, so that we have, the ability to make it part of our Fairfield Public Schools culture, and not and able to essentially train new teachers every year in it, build new levels of training for staff, and have experts at each building, for example, to call upon. That's the type of model we need to implement, and we're talking again with FEA about how we might be able to do that together.
Mrs. Gerber?
Oh, I think she's muted.
I'm trying to see if I can.
Sorry, it originally said I couldn't unmute myself for some reason, so I apologize. First of all, thank you so much to Lenasia and Ian and Leah, even if I couldn't see you, but thank you so much. I mean, the amount of work and time and effort and energy that must have gone into this, I can't even begin to imagine. And, obviously you have a tremendous amount of passion, and you've really educated yourself on so many different aspects of this. It's just incredibly impressive. So thank you so much for that. Every time we get a new curriculum presentation, or even, policies, at least one of the board members always asks Mr. Cummings, what are the costs going to be of this? Because even if it's something that we are absolutely thrilled and excited about, the reality, unfortunately, as a board member, is that we always need to look to what is this going to cost the district? And I think we're all particularly sensitive to that this year, because we are working from a budget that has a 0% increase from last year due to all of the issues that have come up with COVID. So, that's something that I'm always thinking about, and I think particularly now under these circumstances. So, I know in some cases, I know obviously we already had some mention about the professional development and working to try to use that with the professional development that we have, because that's something that, you know, I think that there's always interest in having more and better professional development, but obviously there are only so many days that teachers can have that before then we need to pay additional money if we want to do additional professional development. So that's just something. I do know also you were talking about, you know, the new counselor position when we're talking about the restorative justice aspects and how that would be a new position to work. So, I mean, obviously, anytime we have a new position, it's always like, well, can we add a new position and not take away from somewhere, and, you know, just try to balance things out. So I don't know if I really have a specific question, but it's really more just to say that, you know, I am really excited at a lot of the ideas that you've brought up. And I think that there's a lot here that, you know, everyone on the board and people in the district are really excited to get behind. But there's always that, you know, not to be a wet blanket, but there is always the practicality of understanding that we are under such tight strictures when it comes to the budget, and there's never going to be enough. You know, we all have things that we really are passionate about that we're not going to be able to do. And so how do we find ways to move forward with these ideas and incorporate them into what we do in our district without having to take away from somewhere else, I guess. So I don't know if Mr. Cummings, you want to speak to any of this? I mean, I'm sure I know you've been looking at this, and I'm sure you've already started thinking about ways that we can do things without any cost. So I just, maybe not right now, but just moving forward, you know, it would be interesting to have discussions to see where we might be able to do that or how we might be able to do that, were it all possible.
Am I briefly able to respond to Mrs. Gerber just very quickly?
Sure, Ian.
So Mrs. Gerber brings up an excellent point, and that's something that we tried to stress in the report, is that obviously we want to do all these different things. I know we have a lot of enthusiasm to do so, but it is costly, especially things like curriculum development or things in actual change number 6. And I just wanted to mention that in actual change number 1, we link a lot of free resources done by a lot of different organizations like Teaching Tolerance that is kind of, you know, it's not perfect, and I don't know what the district's policy is on incorporating free things that you find online, if you have to vet them or not, but we did a lot of vetting for free resources that help incorporate these anti-racist principles specifically into curriculum across all subjects. So that might be something that we might take a look at in future reports or future discussions, because we've done a lot of that vetting ourselves, and that is free. So it's a big consideration, at least.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you want to answer Mrs. Gerber's question, if you've given any thought to some of the action items that were put forth today.
I have, and I think, you know, there's pieces of this, the report that are less costly than others. I mean, we got the report late in the budget process to have consideration for new staffing positions, for example. But I think that one of the things that we have only begun to think about and understand is that when you truly adopt an anti-racism approach to the work, it really is a systemic approach that of change. And so the things that you've kind of traditionally done, the kind of go-to things that you've relied upon, really have to be questioned. Are they the most effective ways to do things anyway? So to some degree, there's an opportunity here to align this approach, or to take this thinking approach into into rethinking a lot of the ways we do things anyway, which, you know, one of the things that I've spoken to the board about for the past year and a half is really examining past practices to see how effective they truly are, and are they the best way to go forward, and is it the best use of our money? And with what, if you think about, you know, the curricular approach or the discipline approach, any of those avenues, when they're fully explored, have potential opportunities to revamp how we do business, and that could potentially save money or reallocate funding to a different source, and more in line with what those changes need.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Jacobson.
Hi, Thank you. And just thank you to all for your presentation. And I concur with previous sentiment that the quality and the obvious work and thought that went into this report that I did read back to back is exemplary and a tremendous effort on your part. I know that it's not so much a question to the chair or to anyone here at this point, but just a couple of comments. And that I think you asked if there was anything you might be missing or could help with this a little bit more. Is that I think for me, I tend to do a lot of statutory reading, and that for me there was a bit of a theme to this report that obviously had tons of research in it, but not necessarily statutory reference. So there's, public schools do operate in a highly federally and state regulated environment. So some of the suggestions in here, I think there could be beneficial for a greater understanding around things that we don't really have an option not to do. So that might be helpful for you guys going forward. So that's not for tonight, obviously, but willing to participate in that and maybe shed some greater awareness and understanding around some of those items. Then everyone else talked about some other things, but that was my first comment, but I'll let others go for now and make sure everyone has a turn. And if there's time, I'll bring up some other things. Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question or comment? Ms. Guernsey, followed by Ms. Mascanelli.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So first of all, I just, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to begin this dialogue. I just am so appreciative of the effort that went into the report. And I just think this is such an important conversation to be having. So really, thank you for that. And also, I just wanted to, because, the report obviously pulled out a lot of challenges that we're facing, but I really just wanted to also thank all the educators and administrators that are doing great work in our school to support a lot of these areas. And I think that a lot of them are really successfully preparing creative lessons and having healthy dialogues about all these important issues. So I just wanted to give them credit for that and commend their good work. And of course, that doesn't diminish the need for improvement. Obviously, there's a lot of room for growth. Personally, I'm very committed to social justice reform and, sort of thinking about it as a continuum and where Fairfield sort of sits on this continuum. So that's important dialogue. And one thing I was thinking about in reading, your approach was to survey people, students and teachers, but I was thinking a lot about the Fairfield Voices for Equity group and how it sort of stemmed from this work addressing the achievement gap or equity gap, whatever we're calling it now. And I just wondered if you saw that still as a priority, that specific work, especially concerned about, 8th graders that would be entering 9th grade and tracked in that way. So I'm just kind of interested in seeing how that informed your decision for this report, if it did at all. It was mentioned at the beginning, but then it sort of, it's weaved into some of the actionable change, but it doesn't have a sort of a big presence. So I was curious about that. And then also just wondering, because obviously there's a lot to digest here, if there was any sort of one thing that you would pick out that would really be like a priority, like one actionable item that you would want to see implemented right away.
Who wants to take that one?
Sorry, what was that?
Was that question for Lanesia or Ian or?
Lanesia can take that because she's been doing she was in the high school groups and everything, one of the founders, so she can totally speak to that.
Okay, and I don't want to put you on.
No, we lost you there, Carol. Hold on.
I'm sorry. I don't want to put them on the spot for tonight, but I just want you to know that those are the kinds of questions I'm thinking about when I'm reading the report.
Okay, so what specifically are you asking in terms of the equity group? And Are you saying in terms of like how that formulated into FEC and how that incorporated into the report?
Yeah, it's just that I was wondering if that was still prioritized, because I know that group was very influential in the town. It was a basis for the beginning of a lot of this work, but their specific message that has to do more with initially the equity gap is not like the priority of the report. So I was just kind of wondering how that wove together. So that might be a bigger separate conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of the work intertwines within what we mentioned in the report, as well as the gap. And I had worked on developing that, and I had done the professional developments on that. So a lot of that work is in the report in terms of STEM and tracking. That is kind of like where the equity gap came from. So it correlates there, and yes, it's very much as important as to the things we're talking about in the report, but the report kind of took a turn. We have examples from what Achievement Gap was doing with the equity gap and going in depth with that, but the report is more so in the broader of all curriculum instead of the exact relation between the minorities and these low numbers and all of that sort of thing. So yes, it's still equally as important, but the report kind of took just a different turn in developing a more curriculum-based approach. And to answer your question, and Ian, you can disagree or agree with me on this, but something that we had mentioned for the next steps were creating some kind of leadership or group between FEC and the board. So kind of going to that policy change that we'd mentioned in the actionable changes. I think that is the most doable, and in terms of budgeting and terms of COVID-19. And I think that's a good step in developing this, is creating that task force between people like you guys. You are in that position of understanding policies and all of that in-depth sort of thing. And we have this knowledge that we obtained within the report in terms of what exactly the community needs and wants. And I think that is a good start, is creating that form of alliance between to develop what exactly we can do next.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Guernsey? Ms. Max Canelli?
Hey, thank you. And thank you, obviously, not only to the three of you, but I do hope you'll pass along to the rest of the committee, how much we appreciated the work that you went into this. And so I just had a couple of questions. First of all, the fact that you scoot actionable change number 5 in there, which is essentially the tackling of the achievement gap, the nationwide issue, that's just pretty gutsy to just put it in like that. And I say that with complete respect. I loved it. We've got to do this. It's something that gets talked about plenty. And certainly Mr. Cummings certainly has absolutely in the crosshairs of the district. But it'll be great to get, that this is some fresh eyes on that. And I also, by the way, very much appreciate, and I think this is well worth mentioning when board members speak about it in the public or when anyone gets a chance to, and that's the whole notion that this work is beneficial to everybody. I love that you made that point explicitly, and I think it's true virtually stemming off of all of these, that this is not for the benefit of some specific minority. And obviously your report mentioned not just BIPOC, but that there are other topics still to come. And this is of benefit to everybody when these things are done. And so I very much appreciated that you made that explicit point. But one question I had, and I'm not sure who would address this, but I'm curious, and I think I know the answer, but I might as well ask. In the district, do we have any kind of tracking of demographic data when it comes to our discipline? And that's not something I want referenced, but is it something that is done so that there's, any teeth to, maybe some of the direction of our, discipline considerations?
I can answer that. We definitely would be able to put something together around using the IC database.
Okay. Again, I just think it's helpful as much as possible, because that was one part of the report that was interesting to read, but obviously also a little bit challenging, is that we know that there's other data to collect out there, and there were parts of the report which were fascinating to read. I'm a teacher as well, and fascinating to read from an educational point of view, but which were not in fact rooted in Fairfield data. And so wondering if maybe some of these were bigger issues than we even realized that you just didn't have survey data on, or if these are just general considerations to keep in mind. And I'm not going to go back and start citing pages for that because, again, meaty report. But I would also echo Mrs. Guernsey's point about priorities. I love that you referenced in that last slide, the district improvement plan, that you're cognizant that that is there, and that cognizant of Mrs. Gerber's point, you're very explicit about the financial impact of all of this. But in terms of meeting with your, going back to your group and moving forward, it would be incredibly beneficial, because I'm sure there's research on that as well. If you're looking to make change, what does the research support as the best bang for your buck? Like, if you can only tackle one project, because we can't dump everything on our staff. If you could tackle one, this is the one that has the, greatest impact, or what have you. And, Dr. Parrish and, maybe is already aware of that. Or and I'm not sure if that would be an operations kind of issue. That's why I referenced Dr. Parrish, who obviously has worked with you already. But can we prioritize not only for the most effective, but then if it comes to finances, what would be the most important ones to start with? But I'd certainly be interested in your group's input on that. And go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, and that's something that we kept in mind is we're not like presenting these 10 actual changes, be like, okay, well, let's get these done right now. That's just like
as much as you may want to.
Yeah, it's not possible to do, especially with the extent of this, and there's so many different levels of this work that I think in the actual changes, how we list short and long-term goals, I think by creating this committee of board members and FEC members and other members of the community, establishing, okay, which actual change, like you were saying, which right now is the most beneficial or the one that can get done now, and then looking at those short and long-term goals of what exactly is doable for the community as well as the Board of Education at your level. So I think that is very important to do, and I think that should be a discussion between the Board of Education as well as us, just because we have this knowledge within the report as well as you have the knowledge of actual policies and how everything can work. And like you were saying, like you being a teacher, you can actually see like when this can get done in the school systems and all of that. I think that those perspectives are very important when creating these actual changes implemented within the school systems.
Yeah, okay. And that was it for me. So my last thing would be to, again, echo another board member's point to Mrs. Jacobson's point, who mentioned, specific statutory issues, regulations, is that, I hope your group won't operate in a silo, because I would hate for you to put an awful lot of time and energy, like making this, making X a priority, and it turns out that that's a non-starter for a reason that you had no idea about. Because I respect your time and your energy. I respect the minds you're tapping into. So I just, obviously encourage you to tap into us as well.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Pickup.
This is just food for thought to our presenters. I belong to the Stratford Public Schools Equity Group, and we're putting out a newsletter every month to the staff, the students, the parents, the community members about inclusion, about culturally responsive language, just a whole bunch of information. And that's one way to get the ball rolling and get people, with the knowledge and kind of changing the way we talk. Food for thought.
Thank you, Ms. Picco. Ms. Jacobson.
It's not about on this report, but I was just wondering, unless anyone else has any other comments or questions, is there some sort of an idea to the chair or to the group on, the next steps of our discussions in terms of kind of getting more into the minutia of some of this a little bit, or have we not gotten that far yet? So just curious where we go from tonight.
Well, this was the first step in terms of the board level. I've spoken to Mr. Cummings just in terms of what the district's next step is. A lot of this work obviously is work that needs to be done by staff. Mike, I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on what your thoughts are in terms of next steps.
I can. I think that, just to give the board some sense of, there's several threads that are at play here. One is obviously the work, and they all connect to the different groups that have been involved with this work. So there's the work of the Equity Coalition. There's the work of the Anti-Racism Committee of the FEA. And in that conversation we had last week, and in a very broad sense, I would say that there's coherence around the issues that have been identified. I mean, the 10 actionable items that the FEC has identified, they're perhaps each of them a little bit more refined, but they're very similar to issues that the Anti-Racism Committee of the FAA has identified. And the FAA has put 5 committees around these issues to address. So what I believe we have to do going forward is essentially just establish working groups around each of these issues, and working groups that would capture the 3 voices, as it were, the voices of the students or former students, the voices of our instructional staff, and then the voices of the administration as well. And then working with members of the board around, particularly in their areas. So we even had a brief conversation yesterday, our policy committee, around how we might be able to capture these voices in policies that the policy committee reviews that are going to have an impact on equity issues. So the next piece for us is really developing that structure. We have a district leadership meeting tomorrow morning. Part of the agenda is just a review of kind of where we are with this work, the anti-racism work and the equity work, and then sharing out what happened at the FEA meeting last week that some of the administrators participated in, and then start to identify next steps. And then again, working with FEC, and also I want to make sure I mention that the existing 2 high school groups, as well as each of our middle schools, has now formed a group. So how do we capture student voice in a very meaningful way to make these changes? And so those structural things are our next steps. But really, there's a lot going on, and we have to pull it together, because honestly, I think that if we don't do that, if we don't kind of harmonize this, it's we are going to lose momentum and energy and voice. And so that's really going to be the work that has to happen.
I think for just the board, the mere fact that we have had this meeting, a public meeting, that you've shared this information. I mean, I've been listening to everything that you're hearing, and I'm thinking of all the different ways that we might be able to change things that are already in place. We have school climate committees. Could some of that work be done through school climate committees? I'm looking at Ms. Guernsey, who, did an amazing diversity week at Osborne Hill. Like, a lot of this work, I think, is already being done in different places within the district, that if we get everybody together to have the conversation, I think that we might be able to bring about some real positive change, maybe sooner rather than later, without much of an expense. Because I think a lot of this work, I think, is being done, and I think that there are structures in place that maybe we just need to look at it through a different lens. So I thank you for coming and sharing this report with us and helping us look at our district through another lens that maybe we weren't all looking at it through before, as we're making decisions on curriculum, on budget, on policy. As you said, I think this is just one of the first steps. Can you just share the other groups that you've presented to? Have you presented to the town's task force? Have you gone to PTA council?
Of this, like, of the full report or prior to the report being developed?
Even just the full report or any of the action items. Like, are we the first group that has seen the full report and your suggested changes, your action items?
Yes, we have, well, me and a few other members, we have presented to different community members and groups and organizations in anti-racism work or things of that sort, when we just had our 10 actionable changes. But for the full report in its entirety, you guys were the first people that we had presented to. But we had presented to the REGTF with Nancy Lechwitz and Gina Ludlow. We had talked to their committee about the survey and basically about how we developed it and created it. But the full report, you guys are our first presenters.
Thank you. I think it would just be valuable for us to connect with the task force also, just in terms of getting a larger community perspective and in terms of next steps. Any other questions from the board or comments? All right. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Cummings or staff?
No, again, I just want to thank Lenasia and Ian for their presentation tonight, and we will be talking further. I know there's a lot of work went in, a lot of conversation went into tonight, but I will be following up with you soon to talk about next steps and how we go forward.
And on behalf of the board, I again want to thank you for joining us tonight, for all the work that you have put into the report, for putting forth these changes to us. I think that we will be approaching this with a growth mindset and seeing how we can use all of the research that you have done to make our district more equitable for all. So thank you, and we will be in touch to further this work. And with that, we are going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report. You guys are welcome to stay on with us or go on with your night.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please know that we are a resource. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Use us. We want to be there for you and support the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, superintendent's report.
All right, thank you. So just a couple things. One is that, as it says on the agenda, I'm going to be providing in the weekly. We met with policy committee yesterday and reviewed a draft of a emergency closure policy that would be one of our C19 policies. You know, those policies we put together just for this year related to COVID. So it would be it's a draft of C19.11. And essentially, it's our emergency closure policy, but with the language lifted from the commissioner's letter from October, essentially providing some guidance around remote learning days that could be instituted this year due to weather. And I also will be sharing with you a list of administrative regulations that I put together, again, based off of the guidance that came out with that commissioner's letter, and also a reference in it to addendum 12. So I have that ready to go, and the draft of the policy is ready to go, and my hope is that we can bring this forward for a read and a vote, if possible, on the 12th, because while the immediate forecast looks good, this has been already a year of continual change. So, and surprise. So I'm hesitant to let it go to the second board meeting and business meeting in January, which is all the way at the end of the month. So that's one thing. And the other thing was, I just get a sense of the board, if you can, we're obviously going to be presenting budget next Tuesday night. The budget presentation will be part of the agenda, and then we'll be getting into the budget workshops. Last year, we used a Google spreadsheet to collect your questions, and I'm wondering if, doing that again this year, if there was any thought about how that worked for people, if it was worth doing again, and if is it worth doing again, but with some possible changes to the way we did it would be helpful to folks. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on that, whether tonight or if you just want to shoot me an email in the next couple of days. But we want to have that ready, essentially the night of the presentation, so that those of you who, after the presentation, can't sleep and want to start asking your questions will be ready to go. And we know who you are.
I don't know if anybody has any initial thoughts to the budget questions. Jen Jacobson?
No, I was just going to say, generally speaking, I really liked it actually, just because I feel like it cut down on redundancy, because you could see if somebody else already asked a question. And so you're not receiving the same question 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So that to me, and then I also liked that it was organized by the night, topics, so that if you needed to refer back at some point, you knew it was on the first night. I don't know. I just like the organization of it personally, and that I found it to be very helpful and efficient process actually, and not needing to submit as many questions myself if somebody else already asked it. So,
okay, thank you.
Jim Maxinelli?
Yeah, I just wanted to back up to the policy, and just again, I want to reiterate what Mr. Cummings is asking of the board, is that we are looking at this as being a one and done. So we should receive it in the packets tomorrow, and it's not only the policy, but we suggested that the regs accompany that, just to give the not that the regs are not what the board approves. The board approves the policy, but the regs will just help to flesh out your understanding of what is intended by their application. So that's one. So just to give that a special eye, because we would appreciate the vote Tuesday night. And then secondly, I'm not sure if tonight's the night for it, or I can just kind of put this out in the pub. Actually, I think I would rather do this in public Tuesday night, but just for the assurance of the board that the policy committee, now having looked at it twice, so that was in its prior iteration when Jeff was with us on policy, as well as Tuesday night with Carol there, really gave free voice to all of our concerns about the application of this policy. And again, the idea being the school being closed and being changed to a full remote day for the district, which of course now has already taken place on December 18th. And we have a lot of concerns about this policy actually being used. And I'm happy to say Mr. Cummings was certainly extremely receptive to all of our concerns, and so that they're out there. He has heard us, but we'll probably give voice to those Tuesday night, not in opposition to the policy, but just so that the public knows all of our concerns about it and know that they have been a part of the formal policy discussion. Because obviously this isn't something that we're looking to willy-nilly start saying, oh, we've got a little bit of sleet, let's just everybody stay home. We've had a very full discussion about this.
Thank you. Any other questions for the superintendent? And I just want to put it out there to the board now that we're in front of each other. And I mentioned in an email, my suggestion would be for us to have our budget workshops virtually. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was okay with that. Yes? And we'll keep our regular meetings in person. I just think it's just easier. I'm saying this, just being able without the masks, and we can not have to worry about if bad weather prevents us from going to central office. All right, so that will be the plan. We'll have our regular meetings at Kings Highway, and the budget workshops will be via WebEx. All right. Jen Jacobson?
sorry, this is to Mr. Cummings. I was wondering, normally there's a kind of a PTA brown bag lunch budget. Are you planning on doing that virtually this year? Or not planning on doing that, or just so, because we're going to be virtual, it's going to be, maybe harder for some people. So just wondering if that process was moving forward this year.
Yeah, we are going to do it. I think that, we'll do that. We'll also talk about it with PTA Council, and I have to reach out to a couple other groups. But my sense is now that even if we're able to hold something like that, like in say the boardroom, people's hesitancies even to come forward. So it seems that when people have a choice, they're opting for virtual.
Yeah, yeah. I assumed it would be virtual. My point was you are going to do one still, so
Yeah.
there would be
Oh, absolutely,
time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Picco?
Mr. Cummings, I was happy to be going through all of my Board of Ed stuff today, and I came across something Tony Jones had made when she went to her Board of
yeah.
Finance meeting. I was just wondering if you were thinking about making one of these.
We actually had one last year. We did have one last year. I don't think it got much use.
Get my
Because we were
mind.
all in hiding. We weren't putting it actually on people's physical desks last year, but we did do that because we thought it was really a nice. It was a great visual. Tony put a lot of work in that, and his staff here put a lot of work into it. So it seemed to go over very well a couple years ago. We'll use it again.
The placemat is here to stay.
Yeah.
The budget placement is here to stay. All right. Any other final remarks, comments? Mr. Asa?
Just with regards to the upcoming meetings in January, both in person and virtual, any word from Fair TV? I mean, are we back on our game with that? Everything should be good to go as far as broadcasting via TV. Have we secured all those dates?
He should, Mr. Asa, we heard from Jerry today, and I believe he should have it. He'll know for certain on Friday. He's got, there's been, I think, he's ordered several parts over this and gotten this working, but he should know for certain on Friday whether this is going to work or not. I will say to you that I had a conversation with Marco earlier, and we could, if the board, if we're not able to broadcast on Tuesday night from an in-person meeting, we could do a virtual meeting if that's the board's decision at that point, only because it would at least, when we do this format, at least everything is heard. The PowerPoints can be shown, which obviously was much more difficult when we were in person in December.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, because I would like to make this suggestion formally that if we're going to even have a remote chance of what happened last time, that we just conduct the meeting virtually so the public can have full view, full audio, and no issues. We tried our best in the last meeting. It wound up being okay towards the end. But if we find out Friday that we're not a go for that, we should seriously consider. I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think that makes sense. We want.
Board of Finance was held last night, right? So that was on Fair TV. So it seems like things are better.
Yeah.
But it was kind of cool watching Nick at work. I mean, come on.
Just want to make
Board of Finance was all virtual,
Yeah,
right?
but Board of Finance wasn't in person though.
Oh, right. But yeah, wait, I thought you just meant like Fair TV is operational and, showing things.
No, I just, Kennelly, I don't feel like hanging speakers on top of tripods again.
All right, we'll check with Jerry and just see where they are. And if it seems that we're going to have some issues with broadcasting out of central office, we can switch to a WebEx meeting for the 12th. Mrs. Maxicannelli?
Yeah, but okay, now I apologize because obviously I'm not watching us right now. But when we're on WebEx, can the public see the screen? I thought I've watched Board of Selectmen meetings and it's just the town seal and you hear voices, but the public can't see anything.
They can.
Hey, Don. Marco. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. All of your faces are shown in a thumbnail format, and then the active speaker is the full screen, which also applies for if you were to present a PowerPoint, that would become the full screen.
Okay.
And everyone else would be the thumbnail. So right now, if you're viewing the YouTube, because this is live in the same method, that's what you would see.
Okay, I just wanted to check that because I know that when I saw that actually it was a Board of Finance meeting I was listening to some time ago, and that was really kind of disconcerting when it helps if you recognize the voices, but if you don't, and never mind
Right.
that whole presentation with no visual, that would have been tough. So thank you.
I opt to use the seal, but we do show all the video feeds. So.
Which Jerry was pushing back on that in part just because of the, the bad lighting, and having a hard time putting our names, underneath. But it dragged on a little bit longer. Realized that needs to just kind of broadcast the WebEx screen, and it gets to be a little bit entertaining at times when you see people forget.
Thank you. Okay.
But all right. Anything else? Okay, seeing none. Motion to adjourn. Mr. Asa, second by Ms. Mescalcinelli. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, everybody.